Hey everyone, William Roberts here with jamplay.com. You are joining me on the second episode of the second week for the new live course chord progression of the week. So basically what I'm doing in this course is at the beginning of each lesson, I'm showing you a chord progression, and then I'm going to talk about some of the theoretical concepts that go behind it. So last week we talked about the number system. And just as a refresher, basically what we said is if I have a major key with a major scale, for each one of those notes in the major scale, I can use this formula to say this is what the tonality of that chord will be. So, you know, in the key of A major, I could go all the way up my 7 notes and say my 1 chord's going to be major, my 2 chord's going to be minor, my 3 chord's going to be minor, and so on. And we did that all for major keys. So basically, it's talking about harmonizing a major scale and seeing what my formula is to find out the tonality at each one of those different degrees. It's a really common technique that's used all over music. So we did that with major keys. This week, we're actually going to be focusing in on minor keys. So we're going to do the same exact thing, saying, okay, if I'm in the key of A minor, which is actually the key of our first progression, how can I tell what the tonality of each different degree is going to be? And as we hopefully all know, and if not, I'll be covering it in this lesson a little bit too, we have our concept of a relative major and a relative minor that basically says, if I have a major key that has all of these notes in it, right? So it has this unique subset of notes. There exists a minor key that has all of those same notes. So if we're following that, that means, you know, my key signature has X number of sharps. So if it has 3 sharps, there's a minor key that has that same amount of sharps. And basically, if we look at that, that's going to help a lot with our number system, because it basically says if I have a major key with all these chords, there's going to be a minor key that has all of those same exact chords. Now our starting and stopping point is going to be different there. My 1's going to be different, my 2's, but the actual set of chords is going to be the exact same as that major scale. So we'll talk a little bit about that as I get into the progression, but first I just want to play you the progression, show you the fingerings that I'm using for each one of these voicings, and then we'll talk about how I arrived there. Awesome, cool. So we have our first chord progression, and like I said, this is all based around a minor key. So we are going to be in the key of A minor. So first I just want to show you the individual fingerings that I'm using so you can play this progression right away. Then I want to talk to you about the formula that we would use for a minor key. So right off the bat, I will be saying, you know, this is the 2, this is the 5, this is the 1, etc. But I'll go a little bit more into detail with that. So to start this progression off, I am playing this chord. So like I said, we're in the key of A minor, playing from the second note. This is actually the 2. So this is going to be a B half diminished, or we can call it B minor 7 flat 5. So play this chord. I'm using my middle finger here to play the B note on the low E string on the 7th fret. If you remember from last week too, with a lot of our progressions, I tend to skip the A string. That way my voicing can sound a little bit more spread out and a little less muddy. So I have 7th fret of the E string with my middle finger. My ring finger is on the 7th fret of the D string. My pinky is on the 7th fret of the G string. And then I have my first finger here on the 6th fret of the B string. So as you can kind of hear, if I was to just land on this chord, it wouldn't really be something that would feel, it's not really something that would feel resolved. So this is a chord that we use to imply movement. So this is the 2. Then I'm going to go to this chord. So this is an E dominant 7 sharp 9, E7 sharp 9 as we might call it, often called the Jimi Hendrix chord too because he used it in Purple Haze. So to play this guy, I'm using my middle finger here on the 7th fret of the A string. I'm using my first finger here on the 6th fret of the D string. My ring finger is on the 7th fret of the G string, so this makes my dominant 7 kind of triad shape. And then I'm using my pinky here to get that sharp 9, so that's really what gives it that cool color. Same exact thing with this. This also isn't really a chord I'd probably want to just sit with and land on. It's something that's kind of forcing movement within the progression. So, I had a 2, I had a 5, and this is also going to be a special 5, which we'll talk about. And then I went to my 1. So for the 1, I'm just using this minor 7 voicing that I talked about a little last week. First finger is here on the 5th fret of the E string, and then I'm using my ring finger here to bar across the D, G, B, and E string. And you'll notice too with that, I'm skipping the A string. So, by skipping the A string and kind of having these guys over it, you'll hear it's muted. So, even if I wanted to do something a little more aggressive, my A string will largely kind of just stay unheard. Like I said, skipping the A string on a lot of these voicings to keep some of the mud out. So, we have 2, special 5, 1. And those chords were a B half diminished or B minor 7 flat 5, an E7 sharp 9, and then an A minor 7. Okay? So that's our first part of the progression, 2, 5, 1, which as we know is kind of a common number progression if you're familiar with the numbers or if you looked a little bit more into them. Then I'm going to this chord. So now I'm going to do a dominant 7 chord based off of the 7. So in A minor, G will be the 7 of that. And I'm not doing anything crazy with any alterations like I was with this guy. I'm just going to do this straight up dominant 7 voicing. And you can see too, I'm also avoiding some of the higher notes with this one. I kind of wanted a really thick sound, so I just focused on notes that would be on the G string and below. So I have my first finger here on the 3rd fret of the low E string, my middle finger here on the 3rd fret of the D string, and then my ring finger is right here on the 4th fret of the G string. So just a 3-note voicing, but like I said, I think it's really powerful because it's your 1, your 7, or your flat 7 rather, which is pretty sped out, and then your 3rd. It's just kind of got a cool old school sound, and you know, if I was playing a Grant Green song, that would be a great voicing, but in this context, it really works. So, once again, 2, special 5, 1, 7. Now I'm going to do this voicing. So, this is, the way that I'm kind of approaching this voicing is kind of a mixture of things. So, one of my favorite guitar players is Jimi Hendrix, so you'll notice I'm actually using my thumb wrapped around the low E string. Some people don't agree with fingering that way. I personally love using this as a voicing and using my thumb around the neck as a tool because it's really, really easy, like I said, to skip the A string, and I really, really prefer to do that a lot of the time. So doing a voicing like this, I think is a great way to free up one of your fingers. So, I'm doing this voicing, but I'm not barring across to do just a normal F major. I'm actually leaving it open so I can get that major 7. And it's always nice when you can get do a combination of fretted notes and then having, you know, just a couple notes that are going to be open strings, especially when it's not just a normal first position chord. So it really adds some color and, you know, kind of a nice sustain when you can get some of those open strings in it. So, like I said, thumb is right here on the low E string, ring finger is here, playing an F note on the 3rd fret of the D string, using my middle finger to play the 2nd fret of the G string, using my first finger to play the 1st fret of the B string, and then my high E string is just going to be open and ringing. And that is my 6th chord. So, to walk through the progression again, I have my 2, my 5, my 1, my 7, or since we're in a minor key, maybe we'll even call it our flat 7, our minor 6. So my 6th degree of a minor progression will be this major 7. And then to wrap it up, I'm going to kind of repeat the very, very beginning again. So I'm going to go back to this 2 chord, my 5 chord again, and then I'm going to end on this. So I'm doing a different version of a minor 7 chord. I'm actually going up to a 9. So by that, I mean I'm adding this note. And just as a quick refresher with why I'm calling it a 9, because if we're a little familiar with how we create chords with our minor 7, for instance, we know, okay, if I'm playing an A minor 7, I just take the 7th note of the minor scale, right, and add that to the chord. So where would something like 9 come from if my minor scale only has 7 notes? So as how we kind of work at this is when I have my first 7 notes, I can think of some of my upper extensions as a second set of 7 notes. So all that means is I could also call my 1 an 8. And in that I could also call my 2 a 9. So sometimes we'll use upper extensions to kind of add a little bit more color to our chords. And when we're doing that, we use the term 9, which just means the 2nd degree of your minor scale. We'll use an 11, which is the 4th degree. And you can kind of see it's basically we're just counting up from 7. So if 8 is 1, 2 would be 9, right? And then we can kind of count up like that. So our 11 would be our 4, our 13 would be our 6. So that's just a little bit of the nomenclature behind how we're kind of arriving at that. But just to show you how I would play this A minor 9 chord, I'm using my first finger here to bar across the entirety of the neck, basically. So I have first finger here on the E string, the D string, the G string, the B string, and the E string. Now you'll notice it's a little harder now to skip that A string, right? Because before I was using 2 fingers so I could deliberately skip it. Now in just using the 1 finger, I can do one of 2 things. I can either play just the low note and then skip up to the D string, or I can do kind of this mixed grip where I'm playing the low E string with my pick and then using some of my top fingers to do this, or I'm often just going to be using my whole hand, so I'm deliberately skipping the A string, and then I can throw up my pinky to get the high E string. So, barring across the entirety of the 5th fret, and then using my ring finger to get that 9. So putting that 9 on top really, really gives it that nice, cool shine. And if I want to, I can even hammer it on to give it a tiny bit more color. So, just to walk through that progression one more time, we have our 5 chord, we have our 2 chord, which is a minor 7 flat 5. We have our special 5 chord, which is a dominant 7 sharp 9. We have our 1 chord, which is a minor 7. We have our 7 chord of the minor key, which is a dominant 7. We have our 6 chord, which is a major 7. Then I'm going back up and doing 2 again, same exact 2, same special 5. And then I'm doing 1, but it's going to be a minor 9 this time, so it kind of has this feeling of moving up. So, just broke down all the chords of the progression. Let's now talk about the number system as it relates to the minor key, because as you could hear, I was saying some special things about like, oh, this is a special 5. So let's first just break down how I might play or talk about the triads of a minor key. So, as I talked about in the beginning of the lesson, I have this concept of a relative major that says, or a relative minor, depending on how you're looking at it, that says if I have a major key and I have all of the chords of a major key, there's a minor key that has all of those same exact chords. Now, they're going to be in a different place, right? Because our 1 is obviously minor, but all of those chords are going to be exactly the same. So the relative major of A minor is C major, which we did last week. So it's actually going to be all of those same exact chords. We're just going to treat them as different degrees, right? Because if I was in the key of C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Our 6th chord was minor, right? Well, now we're going to be taking all of those same chords from C major, but we're going to be starting it off with our 6th chord, right? So, for my 1 chord, I'm going to do just this normal A minor triad. Like I said, I'm going to take it triads first. For my 2 chord, I'll do this little kind of spaced triad thing. I think it works out pretty nicely here. So, remember, our 7 is diminished, right? And I'm just going to do the diminished triad right now. So, that's going to be 1, flat 3, flat 5. But we're in a minor key, so my 1 is minor. My 2 triad is diminished. My 3 chord is going to be major. And again, I'm using this kind of Jimi Hendrix voice in here. My 5 chord, or my 4 chord rather, is going to be minor. And actually, let me do the minor triad version of that. So let me just play up in triad. So my 1, my 2, my 3, my 4 is minor, my 5 is minor. So like I said, this is kind of a weird special case because I was using a major chord for this, or rather an altered dominant. So I'll talk about why I was using that substitution in a second. My 5 is minor. My 6 is major. My 7 is major. My 1 is minor again. So again, let me just take that through the triad shapes. So my 1 is a minor triad. My 2 is a diminished triad. My 3 is a major triad. My 4 is a minor triad. My 5 is a minor triad. My 6 is a major triad. My 7 is a major triad. And then I'm back at 1. Okay, so now I was kind of toying in between them when I was first showing you the chords. Let me show you the full 7 voicings that we would have with each one of these. So my 1 chord is going to be this minor 7 shape, the same one that we used for the progression. My 2 chord is going to be this half diminished chord, so a minor 7 flat 5. And just to explain why I was saying that my triad is diminished and this is half diminished, so we have diminished triads, which is a 1, a flat 3, and a flat 5. Well, when we add a 7, we actually have a couple different options, and that's when we get into half diminished and fully diminished. So this is half diminished, and the reason that I say that is because I have a flat 7. I could also put in a diminished 7, and that's how we would have a fully diminished chord. But for this guy, we're just going to say that we have a half diminished chord because it's just a normal flat 7, not a diminished 7, which is a double flat 7. So that's how we arrive at that guy and why we have that kind of funky half diminished name. My 3 chord, I'll go up here for this guy. It's going to be a major 7. Look familiar from last week? Same exact guy that we've been using. My 4 chord is going to be this minor 7 chord here. 5 chord is going to be this minor 7 voicing here, so an E minor 7. Then I'm going to go up to this voicing for my F major 7. Then I have my 7 chord of this minor key, which is going to be a dominant 7 chord, and I was using this guy. So you can actually see that. So this is the chord that I might use if I was first showing somebody the different scale degrees of a minor key. And you can hear the difference from the voicing that I was using in the song, whereas this sounds a little bit more delightful, kind of fun and playful. And this to me just kind of has a little more oomph to it, and it's a little more sparse, so it doesn't have that upper coloration that kind of makes it a little more light, in my opinion. And then I'm back at my 1 chord. So let me just take you through those one more time. So my 1 chord is going to be a minor 7 chord. My 2 chord is going to be a half diminished chord. My 3 chord is going to be a major 7. My 4 chord is going to be a minor 7. My 5 chord is going to be a minor 7. My 6 chord is going to be a major 7. And my 7 chord is going to be a dominant 7. And like I talked about, these are all the same exact chords as C major, right? It's just we're shifting our formula over a little bit. So what I consider my 1, what I consider my 2, that's all going to be shifted over. But the subset of chords that we have is exactly the same, right? So let's talk now a little bit about some of the voicings that I was using and why I had that special 5 chord. So like I said, I started it off on my 2 chord here, right? And that kind of had this, as I described, this feeling of, ooh, I don't really want to be around here too long. This really makes me want to resolve or go someplace else, right? So this is kind of pushing us to the 5. And this is the chord I was using for the 5. So this is kind of the special chord I was talking about. So I am using, let me first just break it down as if I was to use this dominant 7 triad right here. And then I'll talk about the sharp 9. So I said initially that my 5 chord is a minor chord, right? But here I am doing a dominant 7 chord. So minor 7 and dominant 7, those have one note that are different, right? Because in a minor 7 chord, I have 1, I have flat 3, I have 5, and I have a flat 7. In a dominant 7 chord, and I'm skipping the 5th, but I'll still say the interval, I have a 1, I have a major third, a 5, and a flat 7. So there's one note different, and that note is the 3rd. And if I play my minor scale, that note isn't in the key, right? So what's happening here? Why am I using this chord that has a note that isn't within the key? So basically, what I'm doing here is we've basically talked about harmonizing the minor scale, right? And I'm using this dominant chord that has a note that isn't in the key. And what I'm kind of doing is I'm borrowing from a different tonality. So this is all based around our normal minor scale. We also have harmonic minor. And harmonic minor is a really, really important part to a lot of the sound that we hear in modern music. You know, a lot of music for past centuries was written around harmonic minor. And a lot of times, if you were to look at a song that's in a minor key, harmonic minor plays a pretty important role in that. So it's not like I'm taking it, I know harmonic minor a lot of times has an association of, you know, neoclassical shred metal or maybe some genres that are pretty advanced, but harmonic minor tonalities are actually not something that's super crazy or off from things that we hear every day, even stuff on the radio. So what's happening here is when I play that dominant 7, I'm playing this, I'm using the 3rd here to imply what would be the 7th note of an A harmonic minor scale, because the only difference between A natural minor and A harmonic minor, so normal A natural minor, A harmonic minor, is that 7. So I'm briefly kind of doing this interchange where I'm going over to harmonic minor and saying, you know what, I like your 5 chord a little better. I think it's got a little bit more movement to it. And if I was to just play this with a normal minor, or if I was just to play this with a normal minor 7 voicing, you'll hear it doesn't have the same push back to the 1. So that doesn't have the same movement at all. So this is kind of a weird thing that happens with minor keys, is often when someone says go to the 5, I would say 80% of the time they're actually going to be referring to a dominant 7 chord or a major chord, because it's borrowing from harmonic minor and it just pushes back to the 1 a little bit better. You could hear when I played it with the minor 7, you know, that sounds fine, but this doesn't have the need to resolve that this does. You can hear much more. Like I said, that's based off of, you know, we've been using that tonality for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's a really, really integral part of our sound. So like I said, when someone says go to the 5 of a minor key, I would often say that they are probably meaning a dominant chord. All right, and now let's talk about why I'm throwing this guy in. So I'm throwing in what I would consider an alteration. So it's a sharp 9. So to go back to what I was talking about earlier when I said the 9 is the 2, right? So if the 9 is the 2, our B note I'm throwing in a sharp 9, right? Or actually, we're from the perspective of E. So my normal 9 would be this F sharp, right? But I'm throwing in a G, which, in comparison to E, is a minor third. So just to break down what I just said, I'm playing a major third and a minor third at the same time, which is, that just sounds really, really bizarre to us, right? And again, it's something that kind of has this weird natural occurrence. When I space out a minor third but put it above my major third, you can see they're pretty spaced out, right? What it's basically doing is it's giving our chord a little bit more of a push back, right? So whereas this is a chord that has a lot of dissonance to it and really wants to resolve, when I throw this in there, it does the same exact thing, except it maybe amplifies that dissonance and that desire to move a little bit more. So that's why I'm throwing this 9 in here. It's really, really common to do what we would call an alteration on the 5-2, which drives us back to the 1. And also something that's kind of cool about throwing that in is now I'm playing that note that was from harmonic minor, right? But I'm also playing the natural scale degree of our natural minor scale. So I'm combining the two tonalities in a way by playing this sharp 9 chord. So just a little departure there. I know talking about that 5 chord, but it's really important we understand why we're doing that. And often I've actually encountered voice instructors or vocal teachers that when they're teaching students to sing in the minor keys, I would say maybe about half of the time they'll learn the natural minor scale, and then the other half of the time they'll use that raised 7th degree of the harmonic minor scale. So swapping out that 7 is a really, really big part. So that's why I was using that guy. I was back to my 1. Everything else will probably be pretty straightforward here. Like I said, I was using this flat 7 voicing here that I thought just had a little more oomph to it, a little bit more character, and didn't sound as kind of light and playful as having all those notes on the top. I was using this this major 7 voicing here to add some coloration, and then I was just going back to 2, 5, and then I was using my 9, right? So something I talked a little bit about last week is when I am playing a progression, I like to voice lead. So I like to have kind of an implied melody. Even if you didn't hear anything that was happening over my chords, you would still hear, oh, there's kind of like a little da, 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 right? Right? There's kind of this implied melody that's going on, almost like I'm thinking about my guitar as an orchestra. So when I used this 9 here, I didn't need to, but I thought it added a little bit more of an arc to the melody because I'm going back from... So when I start over again, I'm like, oh, okay, that really had this feeling of I'm at the end of the progression. And then, okay, this really had a feeling of I'm at the beginning of a progression. So that breaks down how I'm thinking about the minor key, how I'm thinking about all of the different intervals. Everything is really, really straightforward, like the major key, with the exception of the 5. Like I said, the natural occurring chord, for example, in A minor, is going to be an E minor 7, but we're borrowing from harmonic minor to put in this dominant tonality that gives us a little bit more of a push back to the 1. And then again, I'm adding that sharp 9 to give it just even a tiny bit more dissonance, but also to relate back to the natural minor. So I'm going to play the lead portion that I wrote for this song too, so we can talk about that a tiny bit. I just wanted to reemphasize too, though, I know there's a lot of theory that's in that, and my whole kind of feeling about music theory is I like to learn by osmosis. You know, we can go as slow as we possibly need to and make sure we completely and totally understand every aspect of each concept before moving on, but I think it takes a while and we get better and better at concepts. It's not really kind of a binary of you know it or you don't know it. And so in talking about a lot of these things, I think it really just helps to kind of hear a lot of this terminology, to reemphasize it, to reteach it, and as you hear more and more of it, you go, okay, this is kind of making a little more sense. So I know something like an altered dominant, if you're just kind of getting used to talking about music theory and intervals, can sound a little bit scary and crazy, but it's just something to keep in mind, grasp, and kind of hold on to what you can. See if you can fundamentally grasp the triads that I'm talking about and how I'm organizing some of my seventh chords within the minor key. The more and more you go on, the more I think an altered dominant or something like that will make a tiny bit more sense. All right, awesome. Without further ado, let me play this lead line that I wrote and change to a lead tone here. And I'll talk a little bit about how I'm thinking about it. Okay, cool. So let's talk about what I was doing. So the chord line, I was kind of messing around a little bit here and there because I always like to add improvisation to any of my parts, but let me talk about the core elements of the solo that I was doing here. So that's kind of my first part, right? So I'm going to use my first finger here on the 4th fret of the G string, go up to here, my ring finger on the 7th fret of the G, so then I'm using my middle finger here on the 6th fret of the B string, my first finger here on the 5th fret of the high E string, my ring finger here on the 7th fret of the high E string, so, and you'll see I'm kind of just walking it up, then doing a hammer on, and then sometimes I was throwing in that little, just kind of a little slide up to a different note, up to the 8th fret on the E string, and then back down to the 7th, so that's something you can do. And what I'm basically doing here is this is all over my 4 chord, right? So I'm actually just doing the triad of this chord. That's why it kind of outlines it so nicely, and it sounds like I'm playing kind of the exact right notes, right? You can hear the tonalities are exactly the same. So I'm playing a B half diminished triad, or sorry, a B half diminished arpeggio. Right? Okay, so we've got that guy. Then I have my 5 chord. And I'm playing this kind of funky. So what I'm doing here is using my pinky here on the 8th fret of the high E string, using my first finger here on the 4th fret of the high E string. Then I'm coming down to my middle finger on the 6th fret of the B string, so I have. Then I'm coming down with my ring finger here to the 7th fret of the G string, and then the 5th fret of the G string, right? So I'm coming down to this guy. So what I'm doing here is I'm playing over the 5 chord now, right? I'm actually kind of playing a lot of the alterations and the chord tones itself. So this was a dominant 7 chord, right? So if you look, you can hear the tonalities are lined up, right? So I'm playing a lot of the notes that would naturally occur over an altered dominant chord. So it's the same exact thing with this guy, where I'm really just kind of playing an arpeggio that's fitting exactly over the chord tones of the chord, you know? So... and then I'm sliding down to this guy. So, like I said, I was kind of varying it up a tiny bit each time. And just doing that guy, I'm kind of just doing some chromatic stuff here. So just have my first finger here on the 5th fret of the G string. Sometimes I was just doing this little lead tone of going 1st, 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret. And then just doing this kind of nice roll down to get to that 4th fret of the G string. So all on the G string, 5, 6, 7, 7, 6, 5, 4. But again, I'm doing it with kind of hammer-ons and pull-offs to give it a little bit more flavor. Then I'm doing this little lick here. So now I'm just kind of keeping it simple, pentatonic, minor-y sounding. So I'm doing 5th fret, 7th fret on my D string. Then I'm doing 5, 7, and slide to 9, and kind of just re-sliding again. So. So after, now I'm doing this kind of lick, and like I said, I'm varying it up a little bit each time, but the core of it is I'm doing that same exact thing that I did for the previous lick, except I'm not sliding up to my 9th fret on my G string. I'm just kind of sliding up to my 7th fret of my G string, and sometimes throwing in that little trill. So far we have... and then I have. So then I'm just doing that cool little kind of weird descending motion that's happening all over a minor 9. And if you'll notice, this is my last note, right? You can hear I'm just playing it kind of lower down on the guitar. So, to do that guy, I have my middle finger here on the 5th fret of the G string, going down to my first finger on the 4th fret of the G string, going over here to the 5th fret of the D string, 5th fret of the A string, sliding down to the 3rd fret from that zone, and then using my first finger on the 2nd fret of the A string. And then for picking that, for all the other stuff, I'm doing a variety of different picking techniques, but I just want to walk you through. Actually, I'll start from the top of this and just show you each one. So for this one, I'm primarily using alternate picking. It's going slow enough that I feel comfortable doing that, even though there's some single note per string stuff going on. I'm just kind of double picking down when I get to this guy, just so I can really get a little more oomph to it. For this guy, though, I'm actually choosing to use kind of, I wouldn't really call it sweep picking, because I'm not really sweeping directly back, but I like kind of doing this version of sometimes economy picking, where I'm doing a hammer-on. That way I can back pick on this note, and then be in place to up pick here. Here, hammer-ons, pull-offs, alternate picking, nothing too crazy. And then when I get to this last lick, you'll notice I am doing something that's maybe a little bit more akin, like I said, to sweep picking or economy picking. So, I'm doing an up pick here for this little guy, the 5-4 that's happening on the G string. Then I'm doing this little back picking that's happening on D, A, and then 3rd fret, 2nd fret. So, that's the core of the lick that I'm using. And like I said, this first part is really just highlighting that B half diminished chord. The second part is highlighting the alterations that would happen over an E altered chord. And then the rest of it is pretty much just sticking around to the A natural minor scale in the A minor pentatonic. So I just want to play the progression, or the backing track of the progression one more time, and I'm going to play this melody, and again, I'll toy around a little bit with it, show you some of the improvisation that I like to use, because like I said, I'd love it if you guys use this as an outline for creating your own melodies and creating your kind of own thing over this. So, without further ado, let's just play it one more time. So, there you have it. We talked about a chord progression that is functioning in a minor key as opposed to a major key this week. So, we talked about the formula that I would use to get all of those different scale degrees within a minor key and create a chord for them. We talked about how the 5 chord might actually be a substitution for a minor key. More often than not, when somebody says play the 5 in a minor key, they're actually meaning a dominant 7 chord or an altered dominant chord that we're kind of borrowing from harmonic minor. Then we also talked about this little lead line. I was just kind of showing you some basic arpeggios that I'm using to outline some of the colorations that are happening in our chord changes so we can hear that movement even a tiny bit more. So you could hear, you know, when I am playing over that altered dominant chord, it does have this, like, you know, it doesn't have a very kind of standard sound. It's really kind of using some tonalities that are outside of the key and that give us a little bit more of a movement. So when we are at the 1 and going back to, you know, just the straight up minor scale or the minor pentatonic scale, it has this sound of like, ooh, we're back home. We've kind of left that territory of dissonance. So this week, I definitely encourage you guys, look at some of your favorite songs that are in a minor key. See if you can actually see what different chord intervals are happening in that. See if you can write down this formula. We talked about it for A minor. See if you can maybe do it for B minor or G minor and see what the relative major is and how you can look at the number system for that major chord and the number system for that minor chord. So that wraps up what we're doing here. So we'll see you in the comment section. Any comments, questions, concerns, anything you want to direct towards me, anything I can clarify or anything else I can talk to you about, please ask away. Hey everyone. So any questions that you have about minor keys, the progression we went over, or chords or theory in general, please pass those along and I'll answer those as best as I can. All right. What are you doing with your right hand when you play the progression? Okay, cool, yeah. So with my right hand, I'm varying things up a little bit. I talked a tiny bit about this last week, but generally I do maybe 2 techniques with my right hand. So the main one is, like I said, I like to skip the A string a lot for my voicing so it's not as muddy. So generally what I'm doing is I'm using primarily my thumb, my index finger, my middle finger, and my ring finger, and I'm putting my thumb on the low E string, I'm putting my index on the D string, G string, B string, and I'm basically just plugging all up at the same time. So that's one thing that I'm doing. This is kind of the basic version of it. I'm also doing sometimes kind of a staggered rhythm where I'm playing the bass first and then the upper voicing. So I'm almost thinking about how I would maybe play piano, where I would play, you know, bass in the left hand and then my kind of upper structure chord in my right hand. And then the thing that I do maybe on top of that is this little roll. And it's really simple. Basically, the concept is I'm just starting with my thumb and then going up my fingers. So thumb, index finger, ring finger, or middle finger, ring finger. So I'm kind of just mixing all of those different things together. And that's basically how I'm getting that sound. When I'm playing it through, I'm not really thinking like, you know, I wrote a really, really specific comping part and I need to follow that exactly. You know, part of the thing that I think makes you a good rhythm player is if you're always putting a tiny bit of improvisation, but still honoring the song. So to be honest, when I'm going through it, a lot of times, you know, I'll shift up the rhythm just a tiny bit, but that's the core of my technique with my right hand when I'm doing something like that, is doing a roll or doing some sort of interplay that's happening between my thumb and then my middle finger, index finger, and ring finger. Okay. Minor dominant 5 is not better, just different. So yeah, I totally agree there, Ron. It is totally just different. It really depends on the style of music you're playing, what type of movement you want to have. You know, if we were playing, if I was doing maybe kind of an old school like soul song, something that might be from the Motown era, I think just a normal minor 7 on the 5 would sound awesome. Something like... I think something like that sounds really cool. So it is totally just a matter of opinion, and of course I was inserting my own there too. So we can do either of those 5s. That dominant does just come up a lot, and you know, like I said, I've had this with students who are vocal students when I have to teach them theory, or when I talk to anybody who's a voice instructor. A lot of times they'll say, you know, when someone is learning the minor scale, more often than not they're actually singing harmonic minor because they use that raised seventh because it's so integral into, you know, the sound of modern music. So learning both is really, really important. Find out what you like and find out what you like to use. There's no right or wrong answer. It's all just a matter of opinion and what sounds good to us. Okay. The half diminished B is hard to play with the index finger near the bottom with everything else above it. Do you have any advice or an alternate fingering? Totally. So yeah, this is definitely a tricky voicing because it's very, very squished down with our hand, right? Unfortunately, this is probably the best voicing. So here, let me say one of two things. So with this as our B note, this is probably the best voicing that, and the one that will come up, like if you ever pull up a, you know, a jazz guitar book or any sort of portal guitar book, it'll come up with this. Generally, I would say start with just these upper voicings because this will be harder, and then see if you can slowly move your first finger there, because as you move your first finger, everything shifts. So getting this top position, and if you look too, this is basically just like an A minor position, right? Except I'm using all of these funky fingers. So I would focus just on this upper structure first, and then slowly see if you can put your first finger there. And then, you know, if you're ever getting, if you're like, this is just the sound you're hearing, I always do this exercise where I'll slowly kind of arpeggiate the chord so I can hear everything ring out. And that way I can make sure, you know, I'm like, oh, this is actually the finger I need to adjust. So whenever I'm trying to learn new chord shapes or teach someone to learn new chord shapes, I say just give it your best. It's all about kind of two types of practicing. For one, just looking at the actual position and seeing if you can get it as best as you can, you know, doing kind of an isolated thing, and then actually trying to play the progression and going, you know, I might not get this perfect, but putting it into context will really help. So that's part one. Part two, I just want to quickly mention too, there is another voicing that I think will be a little bit easier. I have this guy that I can use, so this is probably the other common voicing, and this is based off of a root note on the A string. So at my first finger, 2nd fret A, ring finger, 3rd fret D, middle finger, 2nd fret G, and then my pinky finger will go right here on the 3rd fret of the B string. And you know, it still works with that progression, so you can also try that one, but I would definitely work on this guy too because it'll come up a lot. Okay. Let's see. That's all the questions. Okay, cool. So thanks so much for submitting all those questions. Had a great time teaching. So next week we're going to be talking about inversions. So it's still going to be using the number system, but we're going to talk, you know, kind of like we talked about our dominant chord, how it can shift, or our 5 can shift in minor keys. We're going to talk about how we can use inversions to create kind of substitutions or different spots in our number system. And additionally, when we use inversions, we can do really, really cool things like put melodies in the bass or put chromaticism in the bass. So you'll hear, you know, a lot of the early music of the Beatles, they use this technique, and a lot of our popular music in general uses this. So I'm excited to teach you that one, but for this week, just keep working on the 2 progressions that we've talked about so far. See if you can kind of, you know, like I said, get into all those different chord positions. I know some of them are difficult, but just try your best and see if you can internalize the concepts, and then we'll be in tip-top shape for next week when we talk about inversions. All right, so I'll see you next week, and have a good week, and happy practicing.